to Angels and Demons, Session 3. And today what we're going to look at as we continue on in our study is the concept of transdimensional beings. But before we do that, I want to just bring us through a brief review of what we have covered so far. So, moving on into the review, you'll remember in the first session we looked at this concept of the nature of reality. What does reality consist of? And we looked extensively at this term that we find in the scriptures called the deep. And as we wrestle and struggle with trying to understand the true nature of reality, we have to reckon with the obstacles that we're presented with, because the reality is, for the present time, we are confined in a three-dimensional construct. That is, that we live and move and have our being for the present time in a three-dimensional construct, a universe of length, width, and height, or so it seems. And because of this obstacle, we're confined to both define and calibrate our understanding of reality in three dimensions using the five measuring devices of our senses. And so in order to really grasp what reality consists of, if there is a reality that goes above or beyond our three-dimensional capacity for perception, that information must come from a source that is above us or outside or through our three-dimensional space. That is, we must receive revelation from a being or from a source that is above or through. And we know that this revelation, this information, this direction has been delivered to us by God, who is above and the creator of all things, in the writings known by Judaism as the Tanakh, that is the 39 books of the Old Testament, and by Christianity as the Bible, comprised of 66 books, 39 Old Testament and 27 New. And so if you'll remember back to the first session, what got me started on this track was a passage that I read in Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 to 19, which caused me to pause and to give some thought to this. And so just to reread that passage, we read, "For this reason I bow my knees to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, from whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height, to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God." And so there we have the three-dimensional linear vectors named width, length, and height. But what about this fourth vector, depth? What does that represent? And so I want to refer you back to the first session for a more complete exposition of what I discovered as I did research on this topic from the perception of the Holy Scriptures to gain a more fuller understanding. So I concluded last session with this question, that are we ready to look around the corner to really take the time to look at this disclosure, this revelation that comes from above, comes from outside of us. And you remember that I stated before, and I want to state again, that this study isn't just about satisfying our curiosity as to what, if anything, lies beyond the threshold of this three-dimensional reality, but to get us thinking, to show us, because we are revelation dependent, and because we have received revelation from God, that there is a lot more to reality than what we can perceive with our five senses. And so it is my hope, and I've tried in my life to recalibrate my understanding of what is real by this information. And in reality, is it has a real nuts and bolts, rubber meets the road effect on how we live our lives and the things that we choose to do and the priorities that we set for ourselves on a daily basis. And so this reality clearly tells us that there are a variety of beings that have the ability to transcend and move through what is above our three-dimensional reality. That these beings have the ability to interact and impact both our three-dimensional reality and the beings that inhabit this three-dimensional reality. And because these beings are above us in dimension, their sight and observation is not limited to three-dimensional obstructions like walls and doors. And as we move forward through this, we'll be looking at some other things that you may not have really given some time and thought to. And so that's what this study is about. It's about learning to recalibrate our understanding of what is real and how that recalibration should impact our daily lives and our priorities. And that is the whole purpose behind this study of angels and demons. And so as I promised in the beginning, in the introduction to this study, that what we were going to do is we were going to poll, and I'm going to limit the polling of this to those three faiths that are commonly known as the Abrahamic faith. That is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so all three of those faiths, at least on the surface, claim to have originated from Abraham. And so I want to begin today by going methodically through what Islam believes on these transdimensional beings, what Judaism believes about these transdimensional beings, and then we'll begin looking at Christianity, and we'll close out the study next session. So let's look at what Islam and the Quran has to say, beginning with God. So we read in Surah 2, verse 255, which is kind of the name of the chapter divisions in the Quran. We read this: Allah is besides whom there is no God, the ever-living, the self-sustaining, by whom all subsist. Slumber does not overtake him, nor sleep. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth is his. Who is he that can intercede with him but by his permission? He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they cannot comprehend anything out of his knowledge except what he pleases. His knowledge extends over the heavens and the earth, and the preservation of them both tires him not. And he is the Most High, the Great. In Surah 72:3, further we read, and that he, exalted be the majesty of our Lord, has not taken a consort nor a son. And so what we have here is we have according to the Quran, a direct refutation in the deity of Jesus of Nazareth. And in Surah 42:11 we have, the originator of the heavens and the earth, he made mates for you from among yourselves, and mates of the cattle too, multiplying you thereby, nothing like a likeness of him, and he is the hearing and the seeing. And so this is just a brief sample of what the Quran maintains about the nature and the person of God. Moving on, what does Islam believe about angels? Well, we read the following two passages out of the Quran. In Surah 82:10 we read, and most surely there are keepers over you, and there is not a soul, but over it is a keeper. And so according to the Quran, every human being has an angel or a keeper that watches over every single individual. Now, this is interesting. Then they believe in the existence, the Quran maintains the existence of jinn, and we read in Surah 15:27, the nature of the jinn we created before. Now, according to this passage, this is God speaking, and it's interesting that the belief in one God uses the plural pronoun here, and the jinn we created before intensely hot fire. So the jinn, and this is, I think, out of Wikipedia, says also called genie. So that's where we get the term genie from. In our Arabic mythology, a supernatural spirit below the level of angels and devils. And so there are in this category, according to the Quran, jinn who are good and jinn who are evil. But what it says about them is they're beings of flame or air who are capable of assuming human or animal form and are said to dwell in all conceivable inanimate objects, stones, trees, ruins, underneath the earth, in the air, and in the fire. They possess the bodily needs of human beings. So in Islamic, we'll just call it angelology for now. You have God, you have angels, you have the jinn, and then their concept of Satan is the names used are Iblis, Shaitan, and Satan. And so here we have once again God speaking in Surah 234, and we said to the angels, make obeisance to Adam. They did obeisance, but Iblis did not. He refused, and he was proud, and he was one of the unbelievers. And so according to Quranic angelology, when God created Adam, he commanded the angels to be subject to Adam and Eve, and of course Satan refused. And down below there in Surah 2695, all the hosts of Shaitan also would not do that. And so there you have in the Quran listed the angelic rebellion and its cause. Now, there's a lot more information there in the Quran about what they believe concerning transdimensional beings, but I want to move on now to Judaism. So in Judaism, we're going to start the same way. We'll start with God, and these references now are out of the Jewish Virtual Library, and it says that God is one of the primary expressions of Jewish faith, recited twice daily in prayer, is the Shema, which begins with, "Hear, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." This simple statement encompasses several different ideas. There is only one God, no other being participated in the work of creation. God is a unity. He is a single, whole, complete, indivisible entity. He cannot be divided into parts or described by attributes. Any attempt to ascribe attributes to God is merely man's imperfect attempt to understand the infinite. God is the only being to whom we should offer praise. The Shema can be translated as the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, meaning that no other is our God, and we should not pray to any other. Moving on, Judaism believes in transdimensional beings called cherubim. So we read about them, the cherubim placed by God at the entrance of paradise, were angels created on the third day, and therefore they had no definite shape, appearing either as men or women, or as spirits or angelic beings. According to another authority, the cherubim were the first objects created in the universe, while in the Slavonic book of Enoch, they are said to dwell in both the sixth and seventh heavens. The passage referring to the sixth heaven is as follows. In the midst of them, the archangels are 7 phoenixes and 7 cherubim, the 7 winged creatures, also known as the seraphim, being as one voice and singing with one voice. It is not possible to describe their singing, and they rejoice before the Lord at his footstool. Enoch then describes how he saw in the 7th heaven cherubim and seraphim, and the watchfulness of many eyes. The Ethiopian book of Enoch also mentions these three classes of angels as those that never sleep, but always watch the throne of God. In another passage of this book, Gabriel is designated as the archangel who was set over the serpents, the garden, and the cherubim. So in the passages of the Talmud that describe the heavens and their inhabitants, the seraphim, the ophanim, and the hayat are mentioned, but not the cherubim, and the ancient liturgy also mentions only these three classes. As we find in everything as it applies to Judaism, Judaism is not monolithic, and so there are many different schools of thought that come under the umbrella of Judaism, and so here we see its expression as we deal with transdimensional beings. Moving on, they believe in the existence of seraphim. So the passages cited furnish conclusive evidence against the idea, popular for a time, that the seraphim belong to the same category as angels. They have nothing whatsoever to do with the messengers of God. In the Jewish conception, the two have always been distinguished. The Book of Tobit and other sources afford information concerning a series of chief angels, but allusions to the seraphim are entirely lacking, and an etymological connection of the name seraph with the Arabic sharif is equally valueless. On the other hand, there is a striking similarity between the seraphim and cherubim. Both are winged creatures, half human, half animal. Both stand near the throne of God and appear as its guardians, and has already been stated. They are always mentioned together in the book of Enoch. This, however, by no means proves that the origin of the two was the same. It only shows that in later Jewish conception, as well as in the conception of the contemporaries of Isaiah, these two classes of heavenly beings were related. Some authorities hold that the seraphim had their origin in the Egyptian seraph, a composite winged creature, half lion, half eagle, which guarded graves, carried dead kings up to heaven, and transmitted prayers thither. The form and office of the seraph, however, suggest rather the Jewish cherubim. And so there's, beyond the information that I just read to you, there's one distinction here that I think is very clear, and that we need to understand, is that cherubim and seraphim are distinct transdimensional beings from angels. In all of my studies, I have not found a single place in the Holy Scriptures where seraphim and cherubim are described as or named as angels. Okay, let's move on to look at this a little bit more, but now we're going to come at it from I'll call it the more mystical wing of Judaism. This is from a site called Chabad.org, and it deals more in the mystical side of the expression of Judaism. So Chabad.org says about angels, according to Jewish tradition, an angel is a spiritual being and does not have any physical characteristics. The angelic descriptions provided by the prophets, such as wings and arms, etc., are anthropomorphic, referring to their spiritual abilities and tasks. Maimonides explains that all the angels fall under one of 10 ranks, and they're listed there. You can struggle with pronouncing them if you like, but he goes on and says these ranks refer to the degree of the angel's comprehension of God. Some have a greater understanding of God and his ways than others. The Hebrew word for angel is malak, which means messenger. For the angels are God's messengers to perform various missions. Each angel is programmed to perform certain tasks, such as Michael, who is dispatched on missions which are expressions of God's kindness, Gabriel, who executes God's severe judgments, and Raphael, whose responsibility it is to heal. Some angels are created for one specific task, and upon the task's completion, cease to exist. According to the Zohar, this is a Jewish mystical writing, one of the angels' tasks is to transport our words of prayer and Torah study before God's thrones. Another type of angels are those that are created through the deeds of men. In the words of our sages, he who fulfills one mitzvah acquires for himself one angel advocate. He who commits one transgression acquires against himself one angel accuser. These are formed from the intellectual and emotional energy which one invests in the performance of a mitzvah, the study of a Torah, or in prayer, or conversely, energy applied in the execution of the sin. And so these beings, according to this, are generated by our adherence or our violation, or according to the Jews, according to either adherence or violation of the Torah command, of the Torah mitzvah or the Torah commandments. And so if you fulfill the Torah commandment, then that energy generates a good angel, so to speak. And if you violate the Torah, then that energy generates a negative angel, according to mystical Judaism's angelology. Well, reading on, we read, according to some schools of thought, the term angel in Jewish literature can also refer to the rules of nature, which, though ostensibly natural powers, are also godly endued powers, his messengers that perform his will. There is some debate among the great Jewish philosophers whether the angels that the Torah describes as appearing actually assumed a physical form, or they appeared in the course of a spiritual vision or prophecy in which the angels appeared as physical beings. According to all approaches, however, seeing an angel requires extrasensory perception, as the bodies of angels are not comprised of all the basic elements of a physical being. Notwithstanding the great spiritual level of the angels, the holiness of the Jewish soul supersedes that of the angel. Only the Jewish soul has the ability to descend to this physical and corporeal world and refine and elevate it. For the human divine soul is a veritable piece of God above, a piece of the Creator, as opposed to the angels, which are creations, albeit very holy ones. So there is a very important clue there in that last statement about mystical Judaism's belief in ultimately the divinity of all things. And so there is, as is commonly known, the spark of divinity in every human being. Therefore, human beings are in a separate class. They are, in a sense, uncreated beings insofar as they have that spark of divinity within them, whereas angels do not. Now, there is this interesting angel in Jewish angelology called Metatron. Well, Metatron is the name of an angel that is described primarily in Jewish rabbinical literature, as well as non-canonical Kabbalistic mystical texts. While only briefly described in a few passages in the Talmud, Metatron appears in medieval Jewish mystical, esoteric, and occult sources. There are no references to him in the Jewish Tanakh or the Old Testament. There are no references to him in the Christian scriptures, the New Testament, and there are no references to him in the Quran. Nevertheless, in rabbinic tradition, he is the highest of the angels and serves as the celestial scribe. Though there is no consensus as to his genesis, nor is there a Christian consensus on his position in the hierarchy of angels. A couple of more interesting beings in the transdimensional ideology of Judaism. Now we move on to Satan and the demons in the Apocrypha. So the evolution of the theory of Satan keeps pace with the development of Jewish angelology and demonology. In wisdom literature, he is represented and referenced as the author of all evil who brought death into the world. He is apparently also mentioned in uh, in Ecclesiasticus and Sirach, and the fact that his name does not occur in Daniel uh, is doubtless due merely to chance. Satan was a seducer and the paramour of Eve, and was hurled from heaven together with angels because of his iniquity. Since that time he has been called Satan, although previously he had been termed Satanel. The doctrine of the fall of Satan, as well as that of the fall of angels, is also found in the Babylonian, I'm assuming there it's the Babylonian Talmud, and is mentioned several times in the New Testament. Satan rules over an entire host of angels. Mastema, who induced God to test Abraham through the sacrifice of Isaac, is identical with Satan in both name and nature. And so there you have their different apocryphal writings, and that were excluded from the Tanakh, from the Jewish canon of the Holy Scriptures. And so there are different theories there being presented. And now there are also some different lines of thinking among Judaism, among the school of the Kabbalists, on the subject of demons. So the Kabbalists, on the other hand, not only took up all the ideas expressed in Enoch regarding the demons as the spirit of the men of the flood, and as the result of the union of Adam and Lilith. And who is Lilith? I just want to stop there. Lilith was, according to this esoteric school in Judaism, was the first wife of Adam. And she refused to be in submission to him and rebelled and left. And so and Lilith was cursed. But they made demons form part of the cosmic design in the amenistic system, in which the right and left are opposite currents of pure and impure powers filling the world and dividing it between the holy ones and the serpent Samael. Now, many of this seems strange and foreign, and maybe at some point in the future I will do a separate study on the mystical wing of Judaism, and once you come to understand that a little bit, a lot of this will become familiar to you. But while the malign powers become agencies of the spirit of impurity, working in men and nations, there goes along with this view the popular conception of demons as spirits of the dead roaming about as specters and vampires. This later view is especially prominent in the school of Judah from that place, and is dwelt upon in the book of Raziel. Now we're dealing with Jewish mystical writings that are non-canonical. Nevertheless, while the number of demons of diseases increase, and the belief in the efficacy of incantations is firmly adhered to, these writers repeatedly urge their readers not to resort to any conjuration or magic practices, but to have perfect confidence only in prayer and in the power of God. No one who indulges in such practice will see good results for himself and his house. And as I've studied mystical Judaism, I find striking parallelisms between Judaism, this mystical wing of Judaism, and occult practices. And so, but that's a subject for another series. You also find these things in Judaism. The golem. What is the golem? The golem is a clay creature that has been magically brought to life. The name comes from the Hebrew word golem, which means something incomplete or unfinished like an embryo. The Talmud relates a tale of a rabbi who grew hungry while on a journey, so they created a calf out of the earth and ate it for dinner. The Kabbalists, or the Jewish mystics, determined that the rabbi did this magical act by means of permuting language, primarily utilizing the formulas set forth in the Book of Creation, which, according to their tradition, was a book that was assembled by Abraham.
Just as God speaks and creates in the Genesis story, so too can the mystic. Incidentally, that word abracadabra, incidentally, derives from the avra cadavra Aramaic for I create as I speak. Thus, under the rarest of circumstances, a human being may imbue lifeless matter with that intangible but essential spark of life, the soul, or the golem. And finally, the debuke. In Jewish folklore and popular belief, an evil spirit which enters into a living person, cleaves to his soul, causes mental illness, talks through his mouth, and represents a separate and alien personality is called a debuke. According to stories about the debukim are common in the time of the Second Temple and the Talmudic periods. Particularly in the Gospels, they are not as prominent in medieval literature. At first, the debuke was considered to be a devil or a demon which entered the body of a sick person. Later, an explanation among other peoples was added, namely that some of the debukim are spirits of dead persons who were not laid to rest and thus became demons. This idea, also common in medieval Christianity, combined with the doctrine of the Gilgul, or the transmigration of souls, another thing which mystical Judaism holds to. In the 16th century, and became widespread and accepted by large segments of the Jewish population, together with belief in the debukim. They were generally considered to be souls which, on account of the enormity of their sins, were not even allowed to transmigrate as denuded spirit. They sought refuge in the bodies of living persons. And so under the Jewish belief in transmigration of souls, a soul moves out of one body and into the body of another human being that is born, and continues its journey into the fulfillment of the 613 mitzvot, and keeps coming back until that's accomplished. Okay, so now we've done just a very brief survey of what Islam believes about transdimensional beings and what Judaism believes about transdimensional beings, and the literature that abounds on what these two Abrahamic faiths believe about transdimensional beings. All boil down to this: they absolutely maintain that there is more to reality than the three dimensions that we can perceive with our five senses. Now, we know that we know that the Quran is not inspired by God, but we know that the 39 books of the Old Testament are inspired by God. And as for all of these mystical texts, not even Judaism claims divine inspiration for the mystical texts of the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah, so on and so forth. So with that said, now let's move on and look at what the Bible actually says. So in the same way, we'll begin as we did before. We'll begin with God. So what does the Bible say about the nature of God? That he is holy, meaning that he is separate and distinct from creation. Now here we see where the biblical data diverges from Jewish mysticism, because Jewish mysticism maintains that in each and every human being there is a spark of divinity. And so what happens when you look at the system is it's actually a oneist rather than a twoist system. Well, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is the Holy Scriptures clearly teach that there is a distinction between the Creator and the creation. However, Jewish mysticism does not teach that. That in fact the creation and the Creator, or the creation, is in God. All there is God, and the creation is in God. And it's a very complex system and very confusing. Anyway, So God is separate and distinct from his creation. We read in Psalm 99:9, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy, separate and distinct. Revelation 15:4, who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy, separate and distinct. For all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments have been manifested. So God is holy, God is an eternal spirit. In John 4:24 we read, God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That is, we have to worship him in accordance with his nature and what he reveals himself, what he reveals to us about himself. We can't fashion a God that we're comfortable with. In doing that, we have set up an idol. God is sovereign, that he controls all things. Psalm 115:3. But our God is in heaven, he does whatever he pleases. In Daniel 4:37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down. He is immutable. That means whatever he's decided to do, he's going to do. He doesn't change his mind. In Malachi 3:6 we read, for I am the Lord, I do not change. Therefore you are not consumed, O sons of Jacob. In Hebrews 13:8 we read, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In James 1:17 we read, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. God is justice. Psalm 7:11, God is a just judge, and God is angry with the wicked every day. God is love. 1 John 4:8, he who does not love God does not know God, for God is love, and God is a triunity. In 2 John 1:9, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. And I want to stop right there and just mention for a moment there, as we're discussing with this term triunity. After I finish this series, which I anticipate will be one more session, then I'm going to start working on a series that I'm on the doctrine of the Trinity. And so if you're confused about the Trinity, and most Christians that I've met are, and as a result of being confused about the doctrine of the Trinity, when they convey the Trinity to those who are outside of the household of Christian faith, they usually do so in ways that are actually speaking to tritheism or polytheism. So stay tuned for that. That'll be coming at some time in the near future, the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. Now, we move on. What does the Bible say about Lucifer? Well, Lucifer was originally the light bearer. He was called the light bearer, the shining one, the morning star. And as to his fall, in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 to 14, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So I want to stop right there, and I want to take a look at this absolutely fascinating work by Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and this kind of stands as an appendix in the back of his book, The Footsteps of the Messiah, which deals with an exposition of the book of Revelation. And in the back, in the appendix, he has this section entitled "The Six Abodes of Satan." And he does a very succinct and clear and biblical exposition of the six places where Satan has dwelled and in some instances continue to dwell, but at points in time is blocked off from one of those dwelling places. And so I'll just read this to you and we'll see what we can see here. So Satan means the adversary, and Dr. Fruchtenbaum says the 6 abodes or dwelling places of Satan are the best way to trace his biography or his career. These are 6 places where Satan has lived, is living, or will live in the future. These 6 abodes are chronological in sequence. 2 of these 6 abodes are historic, that means it's past. The third is his present abode, and the last 3 are still future. Okay, let's look at the first one, the throne of God. This was his dwelling or his abode in 2 ways. First, he was the covering cherub. The point is that he was a canopy over the throne of God. According to Ezekiel 1, cherubs are holding up and supporting the throne of God. He's called the covering cherub or the anointed cherub. He was covered. So if you can get the image of the Ark of the Covenant, above on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant was the mercy seat. And above the mercy seat were 2 angels who were covering. And so he was one of those angels. Secondly, he was also the garden of God's throne, so that he was the one that controlled who among the other angelic beings would have access to God and who among them would not. So at one point he was there. He was the covering cherub and the guardian of God's throne. That is no longer true since the rebellion. Now we move on to what Dr. Fruchtenbaum calls the second abode of Satan, the mineral Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden of Ezekiel 28:13 must not be confused with the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2 and 3. According to Job 38:7, the angelic beings were already in existence when God created the heavens and the earth. Satan was in his first abode, the throne of God. Then, chronologically speaking, after some unknown duration of time, comes Genesis 1:1, when God created the heavens and the earth. When God created the heavens and the earth, he gave different portions of the universe to the authority of different angelic beings. When God created this particular planet, he gave the authority over this planet to Satan. That is what is described in Ezekiel 28:13, when it speaks about Eden, the garden of God. But the description of Eden, the garden of God, in Ezekiel 28:13 is different than the garden spoken of in Genesis 2 and 3. The Eden of Genesis was a vegetable garden, but the Eden of Ezekiel is a mineral garden. Ezekiel 28:13 is describing what this planet first looked like when it was originally created. There were no oceans, there were no seas. Rather, it was a beautiful mineral garden covered by the precious stones listed in this verse. During Satan's second abode, he walked up and down in the midst of these stones of fire. Satan, at this point, had a double position. He was still the anointed cherub and the guardian of God's throne, but now he also had a second abode, the mineral Garden of Eden. It was during the second abode that the fall of Satan occurred, which was dealt with previously. As a result of Satan's fall, he lost both his position at the throne of God and also his authority over this particular planet. Moving on to the third abode, the atmospheric heavens. Today, Satan is in his third abode, the atmospheric heavens. Ephesians 2:2 describes Satan as the prince of the power of the air, and Ephesians 6:12 describes him as being in the heavenly places. Satan's present abode can be described as the atmospheric heavens. Moving on to the fourth abode, the earth. The last three abodes of Satan are all future. Satan's present abode, which began somewhere between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, will continue until the middle of the tribulation. Then Satan will move into his fourth abode, which will be confinement to the earth. The fifth abode, the abyss. The fifth abode of Satan will be the abyss. The abyss is that section of Sheol or Hades, which is a temporary place of confinement for the fallen angels. Satan will be confined there for his fifth abode for a period of 1,000 years, the period of the Messianic kingdom, and finally the sixth abode is the lake of fire. In the sixth and final abode of Satan will be the lake of fire. At the end of the kingdom, Satan will be released from the abyss. He will again do the work of deception and will gather one last army for one last revolt against God's authority. However, when these armies enter the land of Israel, God will destroy them by fire out of heaven. At this point, Satan will enter his sixth abode, the lake of fire, which will be his eternal abode forever and ever. Fascinating, isn't it? Well, what I'll do is in the description section of this video, I will place a link to the book, the title of the book where this information can be found. So, I'm going to stop there for this session. We've looked at a brief survey of what Islam teaches concerning the existence of transdimensional beings. We took a little bit deeper look into Judaism, what Judaism believes concerning transdimensional beings. And we have begun to look into what the Bible says, pulling the Bible. And we've seen enough to know that the Bible clearly states that there do exist transdimensional beings. And we're going to look at this in the last session, and we're going to look more closely at biblical passages that talk about cherubim, seraphim, archangels, angels, demons, and then we will I'll zoom in on once again the main objective and point of this study, and then I will conclude this series with a question for all of us to think about. So I hope that you are, at the very least, finding this thought provocative, thought-provoking. If you do, please share it with someone that you might think might be interested in this series. And with that said, as we draw close to the Christian celebrations of Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday, I want to wish you and your family a blessed holiday weekend. With that said, I'm going to close this out. Have a good day.